right, so you've got a big proposal coming up, and you really want to make sure it's a winner.
Definitely pressure's on.
Yeah, well, this deep dive is going to help you master that whole art of winning those business proposals in English.
Love it.
Yeah. We've got excerpts from this Business English Skills podcast we're going to be dissecting today.
Oh,
They break down everything from like persuasive speaking techniques to powerful phrases to use how global dynamics come into play, even the psychology behind decision-making.
sounds comprehensive.
It really is, so get ready to upgrade those proposal skills.
Yeah, it really is amazing how much goes into crafting a really successful proposal. Like, it's so much more than just like putting words on a page or even just like having a good idea.
Right, and the podcast really dives into that, emphasizing the importance of what they call persuasive speaking.
Okay.
They use this analogy of like an orchestra conductor carefully shaping the music for maximum impact, and they break it down into this power pronunciation triangle.
Okay.
Pretty catchy name, right?
I like it. Yeah.
Yeah. The triangle, I think, is a good way to visualize and remember those key elements because it highlights how much the delivery really matters,
Yeah,
not just the content.
absolutely.
So the first point of the triangle is all about stress mastery.
Okay.
This is where you learn to emphasize the right syllables and important words to really drive home your point. So, it's like implement versus implement, or sustainability instead of sustainability.
Oh, yeah.
And they even share this story about this presenter who like totally lost a room full of investors
No.
just by stressing the wrong syllable in development.
Oh, wow. Yeah. It's funny how these tiny little pronunciation details can completely change how people perceive you and your ideas. Makes you
Yeah.
realize how tuned in we are to those nuances of spoken language.
Oh, yeah. And the podcast host really drives this home with an example of a sales director who boosted her success rate by a whopping 40%
What?
just by mastering these stress patterns.
That is a huge improvement.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, it makes you think twice about practicing your delivery.
For sure. So the next piece of this power pronunciation triangle is what they call proposal prosody.
Okay.
It's all about using your voice like an instrument
Okay.
to guide the listener's attention and really add weight to those key points.
So almost like composing a soundtrack for your presentation, right?
Yes.
Where you vary your pitch and tone, emphasize certain points, and create kind of a natural rhythm that keeps the audience engaged.
Yeah, the podcast host compares it to a symphony building to those crescendos at just the right moments to create that excitement.
Yeah.
And you know what else they talk about?
What's that?
The power of silence.
Silence, really.
Yeah, isn't that fascinating? They actually suggest using strategic pauses, what they call power gaps, to create anticipation
Okay.
and add even more emphasis.
That's so counterintuitive. We're always told to fill every silence, keep talking.
Right.
But you're saying that silence can actually be a tool to persuade people.
It's exactly. They give this great example of this tech entrepreneur who used these perfectly timed pauses when revealing his app's user growth numbers. It's like building suspense before a big reveal.
Oh, that's clever. I like that.
Yeah, like in a movie.
Yeah.
So now we get to the good stuff.
Okay.
What they call the phrase arsenal.
Okay.
This is where we get into the specific words and phrases that make those decision makers sit up and take notice.
Right.
And you know what?
What?
The podcast actually shares this cautionary tale about this software developer
Oh, wait.
who lost $1 million deal just because of one wrong phrase.
Wow. Talk about high stakes, right?
I know.
It really highlights how much word choice matters. One seemingly small slip-up can have these major consequences.
Yeah, for sure. And so to help with that, choosing those power phrases, the podcast host lays out what they call the confidence trinity.
Okay.
They break it down into these 3 levels.
Okay, I'm listening.
So level 1 is the opening arsenal. This is all about setting the stage, capturing that attention right from the get-go. So instead of those weak openings like, today I want to talk about,
Right.
they give you these powerful alternatives
Okay.
that command attention. Things like, what I'm about to share has already transformed operations for 3 Fortune 500 companies.
Wow.
Or, we've identified an opportunity that directly addresses your top 3 challenges.
Oh, well, those definitely sound more compelling and like attention-grabbing. I can see how that establishes credibility and gets people interested in what you have to say.
Right? They even share this great story about a marketing manager
Okay.
who used this really powerful opening statement that totally resonated with the CEO.
Oh, wow.
And she focused on the potential revenue growth.
Smart.
And it works like a charm.
So instead of just stating facts, she focused on what the CEO actually cared about.
Mm-hmm.
Clever.
Right? Shows you need to think strategically about every sentence,
Right.
especially in those crucial opening moments.
Yeah, for sure.
So level 2 of the confidence trinity is all about the building blocks.
Okay.
These are the phrases that help you seamlessly connect your ideas, building a strong argument and establishing authority.
So instead of those weak connectors like also or next,
Yeah.
what do they suggest?
They recommend using stronger, more impactful phrases. Like, for instance, instead of also, you could say, this directly leads us to, or what makes this particularly valuable is.
Okay.
And when you're presenting data, they suggest using phrases like, our comprehensive analysis reveals, or based on 6 months of market testing, we've confirmed.
So instead of just presenting information, you're showcasing the research and the effort behind it. Adds weight to your claims.
Exactly. And then the final level 3 is the response-ready arsenal.
Okay.
This is where you learn to gracefully handle those tricky questions and objections that inevitably come up.
Oh, the dreaded Q&A.
I know.
So what are some of their tips for navigating that?
Well, they really stress staying calm and composed. And they give you these specific phrases to use.
Oh.
Instead of getting defensive. Like, I appreciate that perspective and here's how we've addressed it.
Okay.
Or, that's actually one of the key considerations that led us to develop this specific approach.
So you're acknowledging the question or concern, but still confidently sticking to your position. I like it. Yeah, and they even share a story about this presenter who expertly handled this question about project timelines.
Oh, nice.
She used a technique they call bridge and strengthen,
Okay.
where she not only addressed the question, but she used it as an opportunity to actually emphasize the flexibility of her plan.
So she turned a potential challenge into an advantage.
Exactly.
I like it.
Now you're probably thinking,
Yeah.
this is all great, but what about when I'm pitching to clients from different cultures?
Right.
And you'd be right to think that because the podcast spends quite a bit of time on this global proposal dance, and it is full of insights.
Yeah, that's so important.
Because what works in one culture might completely flop in another.
Absolutely. And they start by telling a story about this American executive who made a major cultural faux pas
Oh.
in a meeting with a Japanese company.
Oh, no.
He used a phrase that was like considered powerful in the US,
Okay.
but was actually incredibly insensitive in Japan.
Oh, I bet that did not go over well.
No, not at all.
It just goes to show that even with the best intentions, you can really step on toes if you're not careful about these cultural nuances.
Yeah, for sure. And so to help navigate those differences, the podcast lays out what they call the global proposal matrix.
Ooh, a matrix. I like it.
Yeah.
What are some of the key elements?
Well, the first one is all about power distance.
Okay.
It explores how different cultures approach communication. So, some cultures, like in Germany,
Okay.
really value directness.
Okay.
So a statement like, this will save you 30% on costs, would be seen as like totally acceptable.
But in other cultures, that could be seen as really aggressive.
Exactly. And they give the example of Malaysia,
Okay.
where a more indirect approach is definitely preferred.
Okay.
So to help with that, they teach this technique called the spiral approach
Okay.
that they actually learned from a Malaysian CEO.
Cool.
It's all about building context and relationships before you dive into the core of your proposal.
Oh, so instead of like a straight line, you're kind of gradually spiraling in towards the main point?
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like the visual too.
Yeah.
And they even give you a specific phrase you can use. Before I share our specific solution, I'd like to acknowledge the impressive systems you've already put in place.
Oh, that's a great way to show respect and acknowledge their existing efforts. Creates a more collaborative feel.
Right. So the next element in the global proposal matrix is this idea of developing different proposal personas.
Okay.
Like tailoring your presentation style to different cultural contexts.
So you're basically changing your delivery based on the audience, but not the core content of your proposal.
Exactly. And the podcast gives this example of this British consultant
Okay.
who seamlessly shifted her style between London and Seoul.
Wow.
So in London, she was all about data indirectness.
Okay.
But in Seoul, she focused more on building those relationships and highlighting how her solution would enhance existing successes.
Makes sense adapting your style while staying true to your message. Did they have any other helpful tips for navigating those cultural differences?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
They introduced these cultural bridge phrases.
Okay.
And these are phrases that help you kind of bridge the gap
Okay.
between different communication styles.
Okay.
So instead of saying, let me be direct,
Mm-hmm.
which might work in New York,
Right.
but not so much in Tokyo,
Right.
they suggest using phrases like, allow me to share some insights we've gathered.
That sounds much more diplomatic.
Yeah. And instead of something bold like, this will revolutionize your process,
Mm-hmm.
you can say, this builds upon your strong foundation.
Okay.
It's about making those subtle shifts in language
Mm-hmm.
that can make a big difference.
Yeah, that global proposal matrix sounds like it could be a real game changer.
Oh, yeah. They even have this case study
Okay.
about this tech company that initially failed to win a contract in Singapore because they didn't understand the cultural nuances. They were so focused on like specs and ROI figures,
Okay.
which just didn't resonate with their Singaporean audience.
So what do they do?
They reworked their whole approach
Okay.
to emphasize relationship building.
Okay.
They acknowledged the client's successes and framed their solution as an enhancement, not a disruption.
Okay.
And guess what?
They won the contract.
They did, and they tripled the value of the deal.
Wow.
Pretty impressive.
Absolutely. Like, understanding cultural differences can really make or break your success. Did they touch on anything else related to that cultural sensitivity?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
They bring up something called universal resonance principles.
Okay.
It's this idea that even with all these cultural variations, there are some core values.
Like respect,
Okay.
mutual benefit, a focus on creating value
Yeah,
that tend to resonate across cultures.
that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we may have different ways of doing business, but we all appreciate those fundamental principles.
Right. And they even give this example of a Japanese executive presenting in Chicago
Okay.
who masterfully blended that Western directness with that Eastern relationship building.
Oh, wow.
She used this technique they call the harmony bridge,
Okay.
where she'd make a direct statement about the benefits of her proposal and then immediately tie it back to like collaborative success.
I love that term harmony bridge.
Yeah.
Really capture that balance.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just saying, this will increase your efficiency by 40%, she'd say something like, which means our teams can accomplish even more together.
Exactly. So you're acknowledging individual goals and shared success simultaneously.
Brilliant.
Mm.
A real win-win approach.
Yeah.
Now, I know we talked about the psychology behind decisions. That's an area I find fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
What insights did they share about that?
Well, they start off with this kind of surprising statistic.
Okay.
Research shows that most decision makers actually make up their minds
Hmm.
much earlier in the process than most people realize.
Interesting.
It's not always about the logic and data.
So that's a good reminder that first impressions are crucial.
Mm-hmm.
You got to capture their attention and create that positive emotional response right from the start.
Exactly. And that's where they introduce this concept of the decision architecture matrix.
Okay.
And they compare the decision-making process to this multi-story building,
Okay.
where the foundation, the very bottom floor, is the emotional response.
So they're saying even in the business world where logic and data are supposed to rule, emotions play a huge role.
Absolutely. And they share this really compelling story of a tech startup
Okay.
pitching this AI solution
Okay.
to some banking executives.
Mm-hmm.
Their initial pitch was so heavy on like algorithms and data.
But it fell flat. It was all about the tech.
Yeah.
There was no emotional connection.
I can see why that wouldn't work.
Mm-hmm.
It was all head and no heart.
Right.
So what do?
They revamped their whole approach.
Okay.
They started by telling a story about a frustrated bank customer
Okay.
and how their AI could transform that customer's experience.
Mm-hmm.
So they used the same technology,
Okay.
same data,
Mm-hmm.
but they framed it within this relatable, emotionally engaging narrative.
So they appealed to the human side of the issue.
Mm-hmm. And they landed a 7-figure contract.
Wow. That's proof that stories have power. So how do you actually tap into that emotional level when you're crafting a proposal? What are some of the techniques they suggest?
Well, they talk about creating what they call persuasion anchors.
Okay.
These are psychological hooks that help your proposal stick in people's minds.
So you need to create these memorable moments that resonate with your audience. Right.
What are some examples?
Well, one thing they suggest is the 3-3-3 rule.
Okay.
You present 3 key benefits
Okay.
supported by 3 pieces of evidence, and you deliver it in 3 different ways.
Okay.
Verbally, visually, and emotionally.
Ah, I see.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about repetition and variety. Hit those key points multiple times, but from different angles
Exactly.
to really drive them home. Okay, that makes sense. It's a simple framework, but I can see how it would be effective.
Yeah, for sure.
Did they have any other techniques for structuring information in a way that sticks?
Yes.
Okay.
They talk about something called cognitive load balance.
Okay.
It's the idea that you need to keep in mind that people can only process so much information at once.
Yeah.
If you overload them with too much data or complexity, their brains kind of shut down
Yeah.
and your message is lost.
That's so true. We've all been in those presentations where the information is just coming at you too fast.
And you're just like, yeah, I'm done.
They share a story about this brilliant engineer
Okay.
who was constantly losing her audience because she just overwhelmed them with all these technical details.
Okay.
It was just too much too fast.
So how does she fix that?
She learned a technique they call the clarity cascade.
Okay.
It's about presenting one core idea, letting it sink in
Okay.
before you add all the supporting details.
So breaking down complex information into more digestible chunks.
Exactly.
Okay, and what was the result?
Her proposals started getting approved on the spot.
Wow. So less is more sometimes.
Sometimes it is.
They must have been thrilled.
Oh, yeah. So they also talk about the serial position effect.
Okay.
This is actually a concept from psychology,
Okay.
which states that people tend to remember the first and last things they hear more clearly than the stuff in the middle.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That has huge implications for how you structure your presentation.
Yeah.
You know, it really highlights the importance of a strong opening and a memorable closing.
Right. And so to leverage that, they recommend using what they call the impact bookends approach.
Impact bookends. What's that?
So you start with a strong emotional hook.
Okay.
You build your logical case in the middle,
Mm-hmm.
and then you finish with your most compelling proof point.
So you're bookending the presentation with the most impactful information.
Exactly.
So that way, even if people zone out a bit in the middle, they still remember the key takeaways.
Right. And they also share a tip from a negotiations expert in London
Okay.
who uses what she calls psychological bridges.
Okay, this sounds intriguing.
I know.
What are psychological bridges?
So they're these phrases that connect directly to fundamental human motivations.
Okay.
Things like the need for control,
Mm-hmm.
purpose recognition.
Mm-hmm.
So instead of just saying, this will reduce costs,
Okay.
she might say, this gives you more control over your budget.
Oh, so you're not just presenting features and benefits, you're speaking to their deeper needs and desires.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I can see how that would resonate with people more powerfully. Did they cover any other psychological techniques?
Yes.
Okay.
They talk about the mirror neuron effect.
Okay.
You know that idea that when you tell a story about success,
Yeah.
the listener's brain actually mirrors the experience as if they were achieving that success themselves.
I've heard about that. It's pretty amazing how our brains work.
I know. And they suggest using what they call the future experience framework
Okay.
to help your audience visualize themselves,
Okay.
experiencing the benefits of your proposal.
So instead of just describing the features, you're painting a picture of what their future success looks like.
Exactly. So rather than just saying, this software will streamline your operations, you might say, imagine walking into your office next quarter and seeing your team collaborating seamlessly, projects flowing smoothly, and deadlines met effortlessly.
Wow. That's a much more compelling way to present it. You're inviting them to step into that world where their problems are solved and their goals are achieved.
Right. Did they have any other tips for influencing those key decision moments?
Yes, they do.
Okay.
They actually have a whole section on what they call decision trigger points.
Okay.
These are specific moments when decision makers are most likely to mentally commit to a yes.
Interesting. I'm always looking for ways to make my proposals more persuasive. What are some of those key moments?
Well, they say it's often not during like the cost-benefit analysis or the final summary, but during what they call the resolution moment.
The resolution moment. What's
So
that?
it's that moment when the decision maker can clearly visualize how your solution solves their specific problem.
Ah, I get it.
It's like an aha moment where everything clicks into place.
Okay, so how do you trigger those aha moments?
Well, one technique they suggest is called psychological mirroring. Okay.
Where you basically restate the client's challenges
Okay.
using their exact words from previous conversations.
That's a good way to show that you've been listening
Mm-mm.
and you understand their concerns.
Right.
Did they give any example of how that works in practice?
Yeah, one of their clients used this technique
Okay.
and closed a multi-million-dollar deal.
Wow.
The client even told him, "It's like you're reading my mind."
That's incredible.
I know.
It shows that sometimes the simplest techniques can be the most effective.
Mm.
Now, I know the world of proposals is changing.
Mm.
We're doing so much more online these days.
Right.
Did they address virtual presentations at all?
Yes. They have a whole section on how to make your digital proposals stand out.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and they start by talking about attention spans in virtual meetings.
Okay.
Apparently, they're significantly shorter than in-person meetings.
That makes sense. It's so easy to get distracted when you're staring at a screen.
Right. But they argue that this isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you understand the psychology of digital attention,
Okay.
you can actually use it to your advantage.
Interesting. So how do you make those shorter attention spans work for you?
Well, they have this concept called the digital engagement triangle,
Okay.
and they share a story about this presenter
Okay.
who used this technique called the pattern interrupt to keep his audience engaged
Yeah.
during this really long virtual presentation.
A pattern interrupt. What's that?
It's all about changing things up every few minutes
Okay.
to keep the audience from zoning out.
Okay.
So you can shift your vocal pace, your visual focus, or even just your style of interaction.
Ah, so you're keeping their brains stimulated by adding those little variations throughout the presentation.
Exactly.
Clever.
Yeah.
I like it.
They also talk about screen psychology.
Okay.
You know how our brains process information differently in those digital environments?
Right. You know, it's not just looking at screens. We're also trying to navigate a whole new set of social cues.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole different world.
Right. And so to help with that, they introduced the digital presence framework,
Okay.
which one of their clients actually used to transform her virtual presentations.
Wow. So she really learned to leverage that digital format rather than fighting against it.
Exactly.
What were some of her key takeaways?
Well, she uses what they call micro engagements
Okay.
to keep her audience present
Mm-hmm.
throughout the presentation.
Okay. So what are micro engagements?
So these are brief but powerful moments of interaction
Okay.
that happen every few minutes.
Okay.
Things like asking a question
Mm.
or prompting a quick response.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah,
It keeps the energy up and makes it more interactive.
exactly.
Did they have any other tips specific to virtual presentations?
Yes, they emphasize the importance of what they call virtual voice architecture.
Okay.
They say in a virtual setting, your voice is your main tool for conveying emotion and connection,
That makes sense. You have to kind of compensate for the lack of physical presence.
right? So they suggest using like 40% more energy in your voice,
Wow.
30% more pauses, and 30% more vocal variety than you would in person.
That might feel strange at first, but I can see why it's necessary.
Yeah.
Did they talk about structuring a virtual proposal differently?
Yes. They recommend this approach called the engagement cascade,
Okay.
which is a little bit different than like the traditional problem solution format.
Okay.
They suggest using something called attention anchors
Okay.
throughout your presentation.
What are attention anchors?
So they're like subtle hints
Okay.
about upcoming revelations or
What?
key insights,
Got it.
things that pique the audience's curiosity and keep them tuned in.
So you're creating that sense of anticipation. Like there's something big coming up.
Exactly. So you might say something like, in a few minutes, I'm going to share a surprising discovery that completely changed how our entire industry views this problem.
Woo! I like it. You've got me hooked now.
They also share this great story about a product manager whose slides completely froze during a crucial presentation.
Oh, every presenter's worst nightmare.
I know.
So what happened?
Well, instead of panicking, she smoothly transitioned into what they call narrative mode
Okay.
and just told this powerful customer story.
Oh, wow. Quick thinking on her part. That's great.
Yeah, and the clients were so impressed by her composure and her storytelling that they later said that was the moment
Right.
that ultimately convinced them to trust her company.
Amazing. She turned a potential disaster into a win.
I know, what a great example of thinking on your feet.
Totally.
They also talk about the importance of what they call the digital empathy framework.
Okay.
It's about recognizing that you need to actively create those emotional connections
Right.
that happen more naturally in person.
Yeah.
So how do you build that sense of connection
Right.
in a virtual environment?
Exactly.
Well, one technique they suggest is virtual mirroring,
Okay.
where you subtly match your audience's energy level.
Okay. And speaking patterns.
Okay.
So if they're formal, you're formal.
Mm-hmm.
If they're more laid back,
Right.
you adjust accordingly.
So it's like a digital dance of empathy.
Exactly. I like that too.
Makes it sound less intimidating.
Mm-hmm.
Any other tips for improving your virtual presence?
They have this great tip for camera presence.
Okay.
So instead of trying to look at everyone on screen,
Mm,
which can feel awkward and unnatural,
right.
they suggest using what they call the intimate eye line technique,
Okay. What's that?
where you pick one spot on your camera to focus on
Okay.
and imagine you're having a conversation
Mm.
with just a single person.
Oh, interesting. That sounds like it would help you relax and connect on a deeper level.
Mm-hmm. And they argue that this actually makes you feel more present and engaging to the entire group.
Oh, that's a great tip.
Now, we've talked a lot about the spoken presentation,
Right.
but what about the written proposal itself?
Right.
Did they give any advice on that? Yeah, because I feel like a lot of people struggle with that.
They do. And
Yeah.
they have a whole section on how to transform your written proposals
Mm-hmm.
into these engaging spoken presentations.
Cool.
They acknowledge that written and spoken English are very different.
Right.
That we use different structures, rhythms, even vocabulary.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed that
Mhm.
my writing tends to be much more formal than my speaking style.
So to kind of bridge that gap, they introduced this technique called the translation triangle.
Ooh, I like visual aids.
Oh.
What's the translation triangle all about?
Well, it's a three-pronged approach
Okay.
that involves breathing English,
Okay.
connector chemistry,
Okay.
and emphasis evolution.
Okay. Break it down for me. What's
Right.
breathing English?
So it's about taking those long, complex sentences that we often use in writing
Okay.
and transforming them into those shorter, more natural-sounding phrases.
Okay.
So instead of saying the implementation timeline indicates significant cost reduction potential, you might say something like, look at these timeline numbers. They show we could seriously cut your costs.
Okay. So much clearer and more conversational.
Mm.
I can see why that would be more engaging.
Exactly. And then there's connector chemistry,
Okay.
which is all about replacing those formal written transitions with more natural spoken connectors.
Okay. So instead of saying things like moreover or subsequently, what do they recommend?
They suggest using phrases like, and here's something really interesting, or that leads us to.
Okay.
It's about creating that smooth conversational flow.
Yeah, that makes a big difference.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds so much more engaging when you use those natural transitions.
Mm-hmm.
What was that third element?
So the third one is emphasis evolution.
Right.
This is all about using your voice to create those verbal highlights.
Okay.
It's like using bold or italics
Right.
in a written text.
I like that analogy. So how do you do that?
So one of the podcast host's clients mastered this by strategically emphasizing key words and phrases. So instead of just saying, this solution provides significant ROI, she might say something like, now this is crucial. The return on investment is going to surprise you.
Oh, I like it. You're adding that drama, highlighting those key points.
Right.
So it's not just about what you say, but how you say it.
Exactly. And they also talk about using conversational phrases and hooks, what they call the conversation cascade,
Okay.
to make your presentation feel more like a natural dialogue.
So make the audience feel like they're part of the conversation.
So you might use phrases like, you know, what's interesting about this? Or here's the exciting part.
So bringing in those conversational elements that we use in everyday speech.
Right. And they even share this story about a presenter
Oh.
who transformed this really dry technical proposal just by adding these simple elements.
Cool.
And guess what the client said? It was the most engaging technical presentation they'd ever seen.
That's amazing. Sometimes it's the small tweaks that make the biggest difference.
Yeah. They also have a great tip for handling complex data
Okay.
in those spoken presentations.
Okay.
They call it the clarity pyramid.
Okay.
Instead of starting with all the details and then building up to the impact, they suggest starting with the impact
Okay.
and then adding context.
Okay, so you're leading with the most important information first. That makes sense.
Right. So instead of saying, our analysis of quarterly data indicates a 23% efficiency increase,
Okay.
you might say something like, we can boost your efficiency by nearly a quarter. Want to see how we got to that number?
Oh, that's so much more compelling. It grabs their attention, and then you can dive into the details
Yeah.
if they're interested.
Mm-hmm.
I like it.
Yeah.
They also mentioned something about energy mapping, didn't they?
They did.
Okay.
They emphasize that written proposals typically maintain that consistent tone, where spoken presentations need more of an energy arc
Okay.
to keep the audience engaged.
Yeah, that makes sense. You need to create that dynamic flow, those highs and lows that keep people interested.
Right.
Did they offer any specific techniques for that?
Yeah, so one of the podcast host's clients
Okay.
uses what they call the wave technique.
Okay.
It involves alternating between these high-energy moments
Okay.
and more reflective pauses.
Like waves crashing on the shore.
Exactly.
It keeps things interesting and helps that information sink in.
Right.
I like that analogy.
And you know what else?
What's that?
They talk about this case study of a marketing team that had these fantastic written proposals,
Okay.
but their spoken presentations were falling flat.
Okay.
And it turned out they were just reading their proposals out loud.
Ouch, that's a recipe for boredom.
I know.
So how did they fix that?
So to fix this, they used what the podcast calls the transformation template.
Okay.
So for each paragraph in their written proposal, they would ask themselves 3 key questions.
Okay.
How would I explain this to a colleague? What questions would this raise?
Okay.
And how can I make this interactive?
Ooh, I love those questions.
Mm-hmm.
Because it forces you to think about the information from the listener's perspective and how to make it more engaging.
Exactly. And their presentations improved dramatically.
Awesome.
Yeah, their next presentation sparked so much engagement that they actually ran over time because of all the questions.
Wow, that's a huge improvement. So even small changes can have a big impact.
Yeah, for sure. And they also recommend using what they call the memory hook method
Okay.
to create these verbal callbacks
Okay.
throughout your presentation. Because since listeners can't refer back to previous slides
Right.
like they can with a written proposal, those callbacks become even more important.
Right, so how does the memory hook method work?
Well, they suggest using echo phrases,
Okay.
which are key terms or concepts that you refer back to later in the presentation.
Okay.
It's like leaving breadcrumbs for the listener
Right.
to follow,
Okay.
helping them connect the dots
Okay.
and remember those key points.
That's a great way to improve comprehension and make sure the message sticks.
Now, we've talked about general techniques,
Right.
but what about tailoring your language to different industries?
Yeah. Did they address that at all?
They do. It's a whole section on the importance of using industry-specific language
Okay.
to demonstrate your expertise and connect with your clients on a deeper level.
That makes perfect sense because different industries have their own jargon and ways of talking about things.
Exactly, and they kick it off with this cautionary tale
Okay.
about a software company that lost this major deal
Uh-oh.
because they misused a technical term.
Okay.
It had a totally different meaning in the client's industry.
Yikes. That's a good reminder that even common terms can have completely different meanings depending on the context.
So to help navigate these differences, they introduced the Industry Linguistics Map.
Ooh, another map. I like it.
What does this one highlight?
So this one emphasizes that each industry has its own unique dialect of business English.
It's like learning a new language for each industry you work with.
Kind of is.
Wow.
They even share a story about this consultant
Okay.
who adapted her language based on the industry she was pitching to.
Okay.
So when she was talking to tech companies, she used terms like scalable solutions.
Okay.
For finance clients, it was all about risk-adjusted returns.
Yeah.
And for healthcare providers,
Mm-hmm.
she focused on patient-centered outcomes.
So it was the same core idea.
But the language she used reflected those values of each industry.
That's a great way to show your clients that you understand their world. Did they have any other tips for adapting your language?
They talked about sector syntax patterns,
Okay.
meaning different industries have their own preferred ways of structuring information.
Oh, so it's not just about the words you use, but how you arrange those words.
Right, so for example, in finance, they want those numbers up front. Okay.
While in education, you might lead with the human impact.
Makes sense. You're tailoring the message to fit those expectations of your audience.
Right?
Did they have any examples of how to bridge that gap between your technical expertise and your audience's understanding?
Yeah, they shared a story about this tech presenter who was losing his manufacturing audience
Oh.
with all this talk of agile methodology and iterative development.
Yeah, those terms are common in the tech world, but they probably sounded like gibberish to his clients.
Right, but he saved the presentation by using what they call a bridge metaphor.
A metaphor. How did that help?
He compared agile methodology to the just-in-time production system,
Okay.
which was something his manufacturing clients were really familiar with. And suddenly everything clicked for them.
Oh, that's brilliant. And metaphors are a great way to kind of bridge those different worlds and create that shared understanding.
Exactly. And they also had this technique called precision pivots, where you kind of seamlessly switch between technical language and more accessible language.
So balancing your expertise with clarity for the audience, did they give an example of how that works?
One of the podcast host's clients does this beautifully when she's discussing her company's AI solution.
Okay.
She'll say something like, our neural network architecture. Think of it as your company's digital brain processes data using advanced algorithms, or what we might call decision-making recipes.
Oh, I love that it's technical but also relatable. You know, you're not just talking down to your audience, but you're also not making them feel lost.
Right.
It's a good balance.
Yeah. And they also recommend creating what they call an industry empathy matrix to map your language to different industries.
Okay, what goes into this matrix?
So it has 3 columns: technical terms, industry-specific translations, and universal explanations.
So you're basically creating like a cheat sheet for talking to different industries.
Right.
I like it. Do they have any examples of how this works in practice?
They share a story about this cybersecurity firm
Okay.
that used this matrix to win this major contract with a retail chain.
Okay.
So instead of talking about endpoint protection, they talked about securing every cash register and inventory scanner.
That's so much more concrete and relatable. They took this complex technical concept and turned it into something their client could easily understand.
Right. And speaking of making things relatable,
Yeah.
they also introduced this jargon junction technique.
Okay.
It's all about balancing those technical terms with universal explanations.
Okay.
And they suggest using what they call a triple layer sandwich approach.
Triple layer sandwich? Okay, I'm intrigued.
So you start with the technical terms,
Okay.
then you immediately give the industry-specific equivalent,
Okay.
and then offer a universal benefit. So you might say something like, our quantum encryption protocols, similar to your existing security clearance levels, ensure that only authorized person A can access sensitive information.
So you're catering to those different levels of understanding within the audience. That's clever.
They even share a case study from the finance sector,
Yeah.
where this tech company was pitching their data analytics platform to investment banks.
Okay.
But their initial presentation was so full of jargon that the bankers were totally lost.
So what did they do?
They revamped their whole presentation
Okay.
using what the podcast calls industry voice mapping.
Okay.
They translated every technical feature into financial terms.
Okay.
So real-time data processing became instant market insight advantage.
That's much sexier.
It is.
I like it.
Yeah.
And what happened?
Their close rates skyrocketed 200%.
Wow, talking the language of your client's business can really pay off.
It really can, and one final tip they give is to use what they call the Universal Bridge Framework for those cross-industry proposals.
Universal Bridge Framework. Okay, I'm all ears.
It involves identifying those universal business concerns, like efficiency, cost, risk, growth,
Okay.
that resonate across all industries.
Okay.
Then you learn to translate your solution into the language of each of those concerns.
So you're finding the common ground that allows you to connect with any audience.
Right. And one presenter used this approach to successfully pitch the same project management software
What?
to a hospital, a bank, and a manufacturing plant.
Amazing. It shows that even though industries have their own unique languages, there are also those underlying business principles that we all share.
Right now, I know there's so much more to a presentation than just the words you use.
Absolutely.
So what did the podcast have to say about body language?
Yeah, I'm curious about that too.
Well, they have a whole section dedicated to the often underestimated power of body language in proposals.
Okay.
And they start by sharing a story about this senior executive who was unknowingly insulting her audience in Singapore
Oh.
through her body language.
Oh no, what was she doing?
She was using gestures and postures that were perceived as aggressive and disrespectful in that cultural context.
Oh, it just goes to show that body language isn't universal. What's considered appropriate in one culture might be totally inappropriate in another.
Right. But she actually saved the presentation by quickly adapting her body language.
Good for her.
In fact, she even developed a technique
Oh, wow.
called the cultural gesture spectrum to help others avoid similar mistakes.
That's great. That's a great tool.
Mm.
You know, it's a reminder that we need to be mindful of how our movements and gestures are being interpreted, especially in those cross-cultural settings.
Yeah, for sure. And they also introduced this concept of the presence pyramid,
Okay.
which emphasizes that body language is about more than just standing up straight,
Okay.
making eye contact.
Right. There's a whole art to it.
Mm-hmm.
You need to project that confidence and authority,
Mm-hmm.
but also empathy and connection.
Right. And they talk about something called the power position portfolio,
Okay.
which suggests that your body language can actually communicate authority in different ways,
Okay.
depending on the cultural context.
So you might adapt your posture and your gestures based on the culture of your audience.
Exactly.
Right.
In some cultures, like taking up space and using expansive gestures conveys confidence,
Okay.
while in others, a more restrained approach is preferred.
Makes sense. You need to know your audience and adjust accordingly.
Right. And one of their clients actually developed a technique called spatial storytelling.
Spatial storytelling. Now that sounds interesting.
I know, right?
What is it?
So instead of just standing behind a podium,
Mm-hmm.
she uses her physical space to enhance her narrative.
Okay.
So she might move to one side of the room to discuss the problem,
Mm-hmm.
then walk to the other side to present the solution.
That's a great way to make the presentation more dynamic and engaging.
Mm.
It's like you're physically leading the audience through the story.
Exactly. And they also talk about the importance of what they call the gesture grammar. It's this idea that your gestures need to be deliberate and purposeful,
Right.
not just like these random movements.
Yeah, uncontrolled gestures can be distracting
Mhm.
and take away from your message.
Right. And one of the podcast hosts' most successful clients
Okay.
uses a technique they call the triangle technique.
Okay.
She divides the presentation space into these 3 zones,
Okay.
each representing a different aspect of the proposal.
Okay.
Then she uses her movements to guide the audience
Mm-hmm.
through the information.
That's a great way to create a visual structure. For your presentation, it helps the audience follow along,
Right.
It keeps them engaged.
Exactly.
What else did they share about using gestures effectively?
Well, they talk about the palm power play.
Okay.
Apparently, the direction your palms are facing
Mm-hmm.
can actually influence how your message is received.
Oh, interesting.
So palms up convey openness and collaboration,
Okay.
while palms down can come across as more assertive or authoritative.
Oh, wow. It's amazing how those subtle cues can make such a big difference in how people perceive you.
It really is.
Wow.
They also recommend paying attention to your audience's body language
Okay.
and subtly mirroring their movements.
Okay.
This technique's called strategic synchronization.
Okay.
And one presenter used this technique
Okay.
and completely won over a skeptical board of directors.
What?
By mirroring their body language, he was able to create that connection
Wow.
and gain their trust.
It's amazing how those subtle cues can influence people's perceptions.
It really is. And they also talk about executive energy projection.
Oh, yes. Executive energy projection. What's that about?
It's about commanding attention and kind of filling the room with your presence
Okay.
without being overwhelming.
Right. So finding that right balance of energy.
Mm-hmm.
Not too much, not too little.
Exactly. And one of their clients uses something called the presence dial technique,
Oh.
where she adjusts her energy level
Okay.
based on the size of the room,
Okay.
the seniority of the audience,
Mm-hmm.
and the cultural context.
That's great. That's a great way to ensure you're always projecting that appropriate level of energy.
Mm.
Adaptability is key.
Right. And they even shared a case study of a presenter whose slides crashed
Oh.
during a major proposal, but because her body language was so strong and engaging, the audience barely noticed the technical glitch.
Wow. So her nonverbal communication actually compensated for the technical difficulties.
Exactly. She used something called the anchor points technique.
Okay.
She maintained strong eye contact,
Okay.
open posture, and used gestures to really emphasize her points
Okay.
while smoothly transitioning to this no-tech presentation.
Talk about grace under pressure.
I know.
That's a great reminder that even when things go wrong, your body language can help you stay in control and keep the audience engaged.
Exactly. And the podcast wraps up their body language section with this amazing tool
Okay.
called the Global Gesture Grid.
Okay.
And they describe it as like a universal remote control.
A universal remote. I love that.
I know.
How does it work?
So you start with your natural style,
Okay.
and then you adjust certain gestures up or down,
Okay.
depending on the cultural background of your audience.
Okay.
It's a really helpful framework for navigating all those subtle differences in nonverbal communication
Yeah.
across cultures.
That sounds incredibly useful, especially in today's global business world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground,
We have.
but there's one challenge we haven't talked about yet. Technical difficulties.
Yes.
What happens when the technology fails us during a crucial presentation?
They actually dedicate a whole section to that.
Great.
It's all about turning those tech troubles into triumphs. And you know what's surprising? Research shows that how you handle a technical crisis
Okay.
can actually impact your credibility
Really?
more than a flawless presentation.
I would not have guessed that.
I know, right?
Hmm.
It seems counterintuitive,
Yeah.
but it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
Because a crisis reveals your character, your ability to think on your feet, adapt under pressure.
Right.
And those are qualities people look for
Yeah.
in a leader.
That's a great point. It's not about being perfect. It's about showing resilience.
Exactly. And to help with that,
Yeah.
they introduced the crisis confidence matrix,
Okay.
and it's all about embracing what they call controlled vulnerability.
Controlled vulnerability. What does that mean?
So it means acknowledging the issue
Okay.
without letting it derail your presentation. So you stay calm, collected, and in control, showing your audience you can handle anything.
Right. So you're not trying to pretend like everything's fine,
Mm.
but you're also not like
Right.
panicking. You're just calmly acknowledging the situation and moving forward.
Exactly. And they actually give you this recovery response pyramid
Okay.
to guide your actions based on the severity of the problem.
How does the pyramid work?
They break it down into these 3 levels.
Okay.
Level 1 is minor glitches.
Okay.
You know, those little hiccups like a slide that won't advance or video that freezes.
Right. We've all been there.
Then level 2 is system failures,
Okay.
where your main presentation tools stop working. And level 3 is the dreaded complete blackout,
Yikes.
where absolutely nothing works.
That sounds terrifying.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But the key is to have a plan in place for each level.
Okay.
And they call it a cascade response.
Okay.
So you're always prepared no matter what happens.
So you're basically creating a backup plan for your backup plan.
Right. They share a story about a presenter whose slides wouldn't advance
Uh-oh.
during this crucial financial presentation.
Oh, no.
But instead of panicking,
Okay.
she smoothly said, "While we resolve this, let me share something not in the slides that makes this opportunity even more compelling,"
Wow.
and seamlessly transitioned into a different part of her presentation.
That is thinking on her feet. She turned a potential disaster into this moment of genuine connection.
Right. And they also recommend having what they call power packets ready to go.
Power packets, what are those?
So these are self-contained segments of your proposal that can stand alone,
Okay.
even without any technology.
Okay.
So if your slides crash, you can smoothly transition to a power packet
Okay.
and keep the presentation moving.
Oh, that's a great idea.
It's like having a secret weapon in your back pocket.
I like it.
One of their clients uses this strategy all the time.
Oh, wow.
Whenever her video freezes or her slides won't advance, she just pulls out a power packet and says something like, "Actually, this gives us a perfect opportunity to explore this concept from a different angle."
Oh, she's framing the technical difficulty as a positive.
Exactly.
I love that.
They also talk about the importance of building what they call a technical trust bridge.
Okay.
It's all about being transparent with your audience when things go wrong.
So instead of trying to hide the problem, you acknowledge it openly and honestly.
Right. And one presenter handled a crashed spreadsheet brilliantly by saying, "This gives me a chance to walk you through these numbers in a more personal way."
Oh, she turned a negative into a positive.
I know.
That's a great example of how transparency builds trust.
Right. And they also have this technique called the audience alliance technique.
Okay.
It's about using the technical difficulty to actually strengthen your connection
Okay.
with the audience.
Okay.
So you reframe them as allies who are experiencing this challenge with you,
Okay.
not just these passive observers.
I like.
It creates that sense of camaraderie.
Exactly. And one presenter did this perfectly. When his slides froze, he said, "I see some knowing smiles out there. We've all been in technology's grip before.
Right.
Let me show you how our solution actually addresses these kinds of reliability challenges."
He turned a moment of potential embarrassment into a moment of shared understanding and connection.
Right.
That's brilliant.
So we've covered how to handle solo presentations.
Right.
But what about team presentations?
Yeah, they present their own unique set of challenges.
They do.
Coordinating multiple presenters can be really tricky.
It can.
You want to make sure the presentation flows smoothly,
Mm-hmm.
that everyone's on the same page.
For sure.
So how do you create that seamless, engaging team presentation?
Well, the podcast has a whole section on creating what they call team presentations, the Symphony of Success.
I like it.
And they actually start by sharing this kind of discouraging statistic.
Research shows that each additional presenter typically reduces audience engagement by about 20%.
Wow, that's significant.
It is.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think it makes sense when you think about it.
Yeah.
The more people involved, the greater the potential for, like, confusion,
Right.
inconsistency, awkward transitions.
It's like too many cooks in the kitchen.
Exactly.
So how do you avoid that?
Well, the podcast offers a solution called the Harmony Hub Framework,
Okay.
and it emphasizes the importance of synchronization and cohesion.
Okay.
You want your team to function like a well-oiled machine, not just this group of individuals doing their own thing.
So you're moving from a collection of individual parts to this unified whole.
Right.
I like that. How do you achieve that?
Well, they start with this team chemistry matrix.
Okay.
It's this idea that each presenter brings their own unique energy and style to the table,
Okay.
and that's a good thing.
So you're not trying to make everyone the same. You're leveraging those differences.
Right. It's like an orchestra,
Mm-hmm.
where each instrument plays a different part but contributes to that overall harmony.
Right.
They give this example of this team
Okay.
who mastered this by really playing to each individual's strengths.
Okay.
So they had the technical expert
Mm-hmm.
who brought detailed precision,
Okay.
a sales lead
Mm.
who brought that dynamic energy,
Okay.
and a project manager
Mm-hmm.
who brought this grounding stability.
It's a great example of how diversity can actually enhance a presentation.
It can. And they also have this technique called verbal Velcro
Okay.
to create those smooth transitions between presenters.
Oh, good.
So instead of using clunky phrases like, now Sarah will talk about,
All right.
they suggest using connection questions
Okay.
to create that natural flow.
Connection questions. I like the sound of that. Give me an example.
Okay, so say the financial analyst is wrapping up their section. They could say something like, these numbers raise an interesting technical question, John. You've been researching this specific challenge, haven't you?
Oh, that's a great way to pass the baton. It keeps the audience engaged and interested in what's coming next.
Right. They also emphasize the importance of the present synergy system.
Okay.
It's all about coordinating your body language
Okay.
to create visual harmony.
So thinking about how you're positioned on stage, your gestures, even your facial expressions.
Right. You want to make sure everyone is supporting the speaker
Mm-hmm.
and directing attention where it needs to go.
Right.
And they share an example of this team that used what they call space mapping
Okay.
to create this visually appealing presence. They strategically position themselves around the room
Okay.
to create this sense of balance and flow.
That's a great idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like choreography,
Mm-hmm.
creating a visual symphony that complements the spoken word.
And they have a great tip for handling Q&A
Okay.
in team presentations.
Okay.
It's the support spiderweb.
Okay.
So instead of each presenter trying to answer questions in isolation,
Mm-hmm.
they suggest creating what they call expertise bridges
Okay.
that allow presenters to seamlessly support each other.
So a more collaborative approach, leveraging the collective knowledge of the team.
Right. So say a question comes up
Okay.
that touches on multiple areas of expertise.
Mm-hmm.
One presenter might start by giving the strategic overview
Okay.
and then say, Sarah, your team's research really dives into the technical side of this. Would you like to add anything?
That's a great way to show a united front and demonstrate that deep level of expertise that you have within the team.
Right. And they also have this really interesting concept
Okay.
called silent support signals.
Silent support signals. What are those?
So it's like a secret language
Oh.
that allows team members to communicate with each other during the presentation
Okay,
without the audience noticing.
Now that sounds intriguing. Give me an example.
So one team developed this whole system they called the Signal Symphony.
Okay.
A tap of the pen meant time check.
Okay.
Adjusting their notebook meant add support.
Okay.
And taking a sip of water meant wrap up your point.
Oh, that's fun.
I know, right?
And their presentations flowed so smoothly, the audience thought they could read each other's minds.
Exactly. That's incredible.
I know it speaks to the power of nonverbal communication and teamwork.
For sure, but they also highlighted the importance of something they called role resonance, didn't they?
They did.
Those role resonance.
So it's about each team member fully embodying their expert role while still maintaining that sense of team unity.
So showcasing individual expertise, but still presenting this cohesive message.
Right. And they share an example of a pharmaceutical team that nailed this
Oh.
during a complex proposal. So their research lead presented this complicated data.
But she always connected it back to that bigger picture
Okay.
of patient care.
Oh, so she was showing the human impact of the science, which makes it more meaningful and relatable.
Right. They had a great case study about this team pitching this major infrastructure project.
Okay.
And during the Q&A, they got hit with this unexpected question about the environmental impact.
Oh.
But instead of panicking or deflecting,
Okay.
they executed what the podcast calls the expertise exchange.
Ooh, that sounds like a smart move.
It is.
What did they do?
So the engineering lead acknowledged the importance of the question
Okay.
and then seamlessly brought in their environmental specialist
Okay.
by saying, that's a crucial point about sustainability. Alex, your team's research directly addresses this concern, wouldn't you say?
Oh, that's brilliant. They demonstrated their preparedness and showed that they had the expertise on hand to address every aspect of the project.
Right. And finally, they introduced this really cool framework called the Presentation Pulse Framework.
Okay, I'm hooked.
It's a revolutionary way to approach team presentations.
Okay.
They want you to think of your presentation like a piece of music with crescendos, solos, and harmonies.
Okay.
So you start by creating this energy map
Okay.
that plots the emotional journey you want your audience to experience.
So you're thinking about the emotional impact of your presentation from start to finish.
Exactly. And then you assign roles based not just on content expertise,
Okay.
but also on each presenter's unique energy and style.
Oh, that makes sense.
Right.
They want to play to their strengths.
Exactly. And they share an example of this team that used this approach
Okay.
to transform their really dry technical pitch into this captivating story.
So they took what could have been a boring presentation and made it into this unforgettable experience.
Right. And they emphasize that people remember how you made them feel more than the specific details you presented.
Absolutely.
They call this the memory architecture framework.
It's about connecting with people on that emotional level, creating those moments that resonate with their hearts and minds.
Exactly. And one presenter used this framework to transform her technical proposal into this journey of discovery.
Okay.
So she wrapped each technical feature in an emotional benefit.
Oh, wow.
And she created these impact anchors
Okay.
throughout the presentation
Yeah.
that really resonated with the audience.
That's a powerful way to make technical information more engaging and memorable.
Right. They also talk about the importance of strategically building credibility throughout your presentation.
Okay.
They call it the credibility cascade.
Okay.
Instead of front-loading all your credentials,
Right.
you kind of weave them into your narrative subtly.
So you're showing, not just telling the audience why they should trust you.
Right. And one financial services team used this approach.
Okay.
And it completely transformed their image.
Oh, wow.
Their clients went from seeing them as just another consulting firm to being the obvious choice.
That's amazing. They went from being a commodity to being the trusted expert.
Exactly. And they also have this really interesting concept
Okay.
called the response-ready revolution.
Okay.
It's about structuring your entire presentation around anticipating and addressing your audience's questions.
So instead of treating Q&A as an afterthought, you're baking it into the presentation itself.
Exactly. And one team used this approach
Okay.
and transformed their hour-long pitch into this dynamic conversational dialogue.
Oh.
Their clients felt like they were part of the solution, not just passive listeners.
That's a great way to create buy-in and make people feel more invested in the outcome.
Exactly. So they share this final case study about a software company that was struggling to sell their AI solution.
Okay.
Their presentations were technically brilliant, but emotionally flat.
Okay.
They were missing that human connection.
How'd they fix that?
They used something called the engagement evolution,
Okay.
which involved transforming each technical feature into a story of business impact.
Okay.
So they focused on how their solution would help people, not just the technical details.
Right. So they put a human face
Yeah.
on the technology and what happened.
They're close.